Hi, Jane. Hi, Stephanie. Can you hear me? Jane, I can't hear you.
There you go. Hi, Andy. Hi.
Hi,
Sorry,
Stephanie.
I had to find the right button.
Welcome. Jane, can you hear us? Or maybe you don't have a microphone.
Andy, I see that her little mic isn't showing.
Is it showing? Okay.
Yeah. Morning, Stephanie.
Hi, morning, Angelique. How are you?
I'm very well. I'm very excited because you're so enthusiastic about getting your POE done. I love it.
I am.
Jane, if you can't get your mic working, are you able to use the chat box just to send us a message? Just let us know that you're with us. And so if you've got any questions, you can put them in the chat box. Won't you just type something into the chat box for us? Oh, we've lost Jane. Let's give her a minute to come back. And maybe we're all having technical problems this morning. For some reason, I can't get my video camera to work. So, Jane, are you back? Ah, that looks like you're connected to audio.
Hi, Jane.
Hi, Jane. Can you just unmute your mic and say hello to us?
Good morning, guys. How are you?
Hey, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Jane, I was just saying to everybody else, for some reason my video is not working. So please forgive me if you don't see that.
No problem.
I'll deal with it afterwards. Okay, so let's get going. If I can just check which designations you're looking at. Stephanie and Jane, which are the designations that you are wanting to make application for?
Andy, the skills development practitioner.
Practitioner.
Yes.
Jane?
Okay, it's skills development practitioner also.
Also, okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. All right, so what I wanted to do today is I'll share the screen with you and I'll take you through kind of the background and trying to help guide you as to how to get going with this process. So let me start sharing a screen. Okay, and has the aeroplane come up?
Yes,
Yes.
we can see the aeroplane.
Okay. So this is just an overview of the evaluation process, and we'll look at some of the documentation. And please, as we go along, if you have any questions, please just let me know.
Okay.
So first thing is, why have we changed our process? We changed our process a couple of months ago from an earlier process that was quite cumbersome and difficult to evaluate. And that process was, in fact, our initial process designed about 4 or 5 years ago. And we've learned a lot since then, so it was due for review. In addition, more recently, there have been other professional bodies, new professional bodies that have come into being, and they've developed their own processes as well. And that's helped us refine our process. So what we've set out to do now is to have a much more focused and a simpler process than the one that was going before. And we've also been at work harmonizing the designation descriptions for our 3 designations. So currently we have the redefined designation descriptions with SAQA, and we're waiting on feedback for them. But you will be seeking your designation against the new designation descriptions. And you'll have seen them. They're on the ASDSA website. As you go down the designation application process, you'll have seen the links to click in and have a look at the new designation descriptions. Okay, so the focus of the new process is as follows. Firstly, you'll see within each designation description, there is a competency description for the designation. It's typically 4 or 5 bullet points. And if I flick ahead, if you look, this is the designation description for practitioners. Okay, so this is the one that you've been looking at. And let's just walk through it. Firstly, it says that you need to have a level 5 qualification. cognate means that it doesn't specify a particular qualification, but it must be a qualification that is an area related to education, training, learning, and development, human HR development, HR or business consulting or advising. So it gives you quite a lot of scope. Okay, it says it's got to be at least level 5 and it has to have a minimum of 120 credits. Second thing that you've got to address is that you must have at least 5 years experience in this field. You must be able to submit evidence of successfully implementing planned learning and development strategies that are linked to business objectives or organization objectives. And you need a couple of recommendations from credible colleagues who can attest that you are actually competent. And then lastly, at the bottom are the designation competencies. And for the practitioner, there are 5 competencies where you've got to convince us that you have good experience and know what you're doing. Jane, you've got a hand?
Yes, I just want to check with you guys because I have a level 6 and then I also have more than 10 years experience. So I wanted to check, can I still continue with the practitioner or can I apply for the next level?
Look, the master's level requires a level 7.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
All right.
So
no, I get that.
Yeah, probably at this time you should go practitioner.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
No, thank you so much. Okay.
Sure. So the 5 competencies that you need to be competent in, firstly, to develop and maintain a skills development training strategy for a company or an organization. You need to be able to facilitate implementation of the strategy. You need to develop and maintain an organizational quality management system. You need to facilitate career development, and you need to provide business performance consulting and advising for appropriate skills development strategies. Simply put, that last one says it's consulting with your line management colleagues and individuals, employees, and helping them focus on their own skills development game plan. It's as simple as that. So that's what we mean when we say the focus is on designation competencies, and it's those 5 areas at the bottom of the screen that's where you need to look to demonstrate your abilities. That's that first bullet point. And you'll find that there's some in the guidelines documents, there are actually some self-assessment activities that will provide guidance to you as to what sort of things might help you find examples of your competence. The second thing is it says the candidate must give an example from their working experience. So we're going to ask you to look back over the work that you've done over the previous several years and give us examples against each of those competencies of what you've done that shows that you actually know what you're doing, that you're competent. And then give us some evidence to confirm that you are competent. And then the last one I think I've spoken about already. It allows for cognate qualifications, and a cognate qualification says it's a qualification in a related field to our field, skills development, with a minimum NQF level and a minimum number of credits. Okay. So a cognate qualification, I think we discussed that as already. It's quite well established in internationally, and of course, SAC have been using it. You'll see on the right-hand side. The first reference I could find to it was in a government gazette in 2007. Okay, and we've discussed that, so I can leave that. If you don't have a relevant qualification, you can still proceed if you already have experience in the field. Okay, and it's because we have essentially this is an RPO process. In essence, with the exception of the qualification. But if you don't have a qualification, we can still do an RPO process for you. What we need to do is to confirm that you've got the background knowledge that's required in order to do the work. Now, if you're already doing the work, the chances are really good that you've got the background knowledge, otherwise you wouldn't be able to do it effectively. But we still need to test that. So we have a series of tests that can take the place if you don't have a qualification. But in this case, I think everybody's okay if I'm understanding correctly. Okay. So what is the new process? Now, there are two key documents that you need to look at, and we'll take a look at each of them in turn. So I'm going to come back to this. But firstly, there's a guideline document that gives you background information and all sorts of instructions. And then the second document, and the guideline document is a PDF. The second document is a working document for you. So it's the document that you will complete in Word and submit in Word, and you'll give us examples of your workplace experience, and you'll give us evidence to substantiate each example that you're giving to us. The timelines, well, the briefing is now. Then we suggest that you focus on this quite urgently now while it's fresh in your mind. Our experience with previous candidates is that most of the work in completing the workbook takes probably about 2 days, 16 hours to do. What you often find though is you think that, okay, I've got good examples of where I've been competent. I can explain the examples, but now I've got to go and get the evidence. And sometimes the evidence takes a bit longer to get because you've got to go back and say, okay, I did A, B, and C. Can I actually prove that? And you may not have gathered the evidence at the time that you did the work. So gathering evidence can take a while. Often, in fact, you've got to go and get a testimonial from somebody else. And that also can take a while. So we think you should probably try and do it over a period of about 2 weeks. That should be enough time to do it, allowing for waiting for information to come in. But you've got longer than that. You've got up to 8 weeks. So once you've submitted your portfolio of evidence, we then have an evaluation process that will take around about 2 weeks. So it'll go to our evaluator. They will then go through it, and they will give you both written and verbal feedback. You get an opportunity to submit more evidence within that time period, within the cost that you've already paid to the ASDSA. So typically what will happen if there's stuff that's missing, the evaluator is going to say, you've given me an example, but I need more information. Can you expand on it? Or they'll say, look, the evidence isn't sufficient. Can you find something that looks like this as well? So that's the sort of feedback that you'll get. And you'll get one chance then to submit more evidence and get it evaluated within the cost framework that we've spoken about. If you're still not there and you need a third evaluation or an additional remedial, then there will be additional costs involved because obviously the evaluator's got to do more work. But if that happens, we'll talk to you about it. And so that process should take around 2 weeks, and then it goes to a verifier. And the verifier's job, much like a moderator looking at assessors, the verifier's job is to look at what the evaluator's done and check that they've done a thorough job of it and give them feedback. So until the verifier has looked at the information, we can't confirm anything. But in fact, there's a step beyond that. In fact, I've misadded to the slide, Angelique. The final call is through the certification committee. So the certification committee meets typically monthly and looks at the final reports from the evaluator and the verifier and ratifies recommendations that they've made. So that's the process. So what is your job as a candidate entail? Firstly, you need to complete the workbook with examples of your work competence, and you need to submit them electronically. We will provide you with a link to a Dropbox folder where you need to upload your workbook and the evidence. Angelique will give you that link. Please always use that link to upload evidence. Otherwise, it can get lost and it starts getting messy. So when you get the email with that link, please save the email and don't lose it, and keep reusing that link to access your evidence. Then when you submit evidence to back up your examples, please make sure that each piece of evidence is a separate document. And you submit it electronically into Dropbox, again, using the link you provide. You need to give each piece of evidence a unique name so that it's easy to find. And I'll come back to that. And then you're going to need to list, give us a full list of all of the evidence at the beginning of your workbook. You'll see there's a place for it. And then for each piece of evidence, then give us the names. For each example that you give us, please give us just the evidence that's relevant to that example. And again, I'll come back to that. It'll become clear as we look at the workbook. Evaluator's job, and I've already covered some of this, evaluate the portfolio, give you written and feedback, guide you if you need to expand on anything. There's a remedial evaluation possible, and they make a recommendation to the verifier. Evaluation rubric. So we're going to ask you then for examples. For each example, we essentially are asking you to do 4 things. So if you think of an example of where you've been competent, give us the context. What is the example that you will use? And describe the circumstances surrounding the example, the context, and or the situation where this example arose. So it's giving us a background. And if your description is clear and ambiguous, then the evaluator will award 1 point. So the stuff in red is what the evaluator is using as their guideline. And the second thing that you need to do is, how does your action in the situation show your competence? So describe what role you played or what action you took. Give enough information so that it is clear what you personally did. And award 1 point if this example is relevant, and award 1 point if there's good and clearly identified evidence of the role played by the candidate. So that could be stuff that you've done personally, directly, but often when you're in a practitioner role, you're working with a team of people. And so, if, for example, you're completing a mandatory grant report, you might have been working with your administrators who collate evidence information for you, who data capture into your system and such like. So you might have done all of it yourself personally. That doesn't disqualify you. What you need to do here is explain exactly what your role was. And of course, if you're working with administrators, you were taking responsibility for the work. So just make that clear in your description. Then thirdly, why is this a good example of your competence in the area? So describe the outcome of your actions or the results you obtained because of your actions, and explain why you believe this is good evidence of your personal competence. That's drawing a line of sight back to the competence, saying, yeah, my submission of a mandatory grant report, which was accepted by the CETA, and I can confirm that. I've got a letter from the CETA saying that it was accepted by the CETA. That's good evidence of my ability to implement a development strategy. So the evaluator will award 1 point if there is a successful outcome because of the role personally played by the candidate, and award 1 point if the outcome shows that the candidate is competent against the competency description. So there's a maximum of 5 points that you can get there. And if you have given us a clearly described example where your role is clear, you've had a successful outcome, and it links back to the competency, then that's a good example. Then you must just back it up with evidence, and that's the last question. So what evidence can you provide that confirms your role or actions and the outcomes of your action? And here you must just list from your long document list that you've given us earlier, just pick out the bits of evidence that are relevant for this example and provide them here. And then the evidence must meet VARC's requirements if it does not. So I don't know if you're familiar with the VARCs. Are either of you assessors? Jan and Stephanie, are you either of you assessors?
No, I'm not an assessor.
Okay. You'll find in the workbook, there's a description of the VARC's requirements. So let's pick it up when we get there. Okay. Technical details. And I don't know if this is particularly urgent for you to know, but let's just work through it quickly. Bear in mind, there is a difference between assessment of learning and evaluation of work experience. And you need to make a little paradigm shift. So if you're an assessor, then you are in the assessment paradigm. If you don't, not an assessor, it actually may help. The difference is this, when you're assessing a learner who is seeking a qualification, the qualification guides the assessment that in turn define the learning context. So if you look at the description of a qualification and the unit standards or the outcomes, if you're looking at an occupational qualification, it gives very clear requirements and how it's going to be assessed. And it's linked to a learning program. So that provides actually a very finite description of the knowledge and application that's being assessed. And the focus there is a strong focus on knowledge and application of knowledge. And it's about showing you can do what you learned at least once. On the other hand, what you're doing with this portfolio is a wider thing. It's not against a qualification where there's been a learning manual and it's not finite. You're having to think back over several years of your working experience and try and identify some examples out of all the things that you've done that show that you know what you're doing, that you've got broad competency. It is, in a sense, an RPL exercise where each candidate will have vastly different experiences. Good Lord, there's a typo there. I'll fix that. And we'll need guidance to find relevant examples over the specified number of years with appropriate evidence to back up the example. And you're using naturally occurring evidence most of the time, and that's often hard to prove. So if you think back over the things that you've done, you might not have kept records. Even though you did outstanding work, you might not have enough solid evidence to back it up. So that can be a challenge. And lastly, the comment is what you're trying to do here is to show consistent good performance over multiple instances, rather than when you assess for a qualification, you only have to be good once and you get your qualification. This is about consistent good performance. So there is a paradigm shift here, and we are very aware of that when we are evaluating portfolios. The timelines, I'm not going to go into details of this with you. I think that what we've seen earlier is sufficient. And this we'll give you a copy of. This really tells you in detail, you know, what and how you need to work and what you need to do. So it spells out the step-by-step process as to how we work through it. And you'll see that there's some bits in red. So the evaluator's first evaluation is done with red. If you do any rework, we ask you to change and submit it in blue text. The remedial on that is in purple. The verification is done in green. So that's just some stuff as background. I don't think you need to worry too much about that at this point. Okay, can I move on to look at the guideline document? You guys good to go?
Yes,
okay.
Andy.
Okay, where has it got to? Bear with me. It's for some reason not showing. I'm having, hang on, wait. Oh, there we go. It's a technically challenging day, I think. Okay, let me just try and get this big enough. Can you see the evaluation document?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this is the guideline document that you're going to be looking at, and as you can see, it's in PDF. So there's a contents page. Have you either of you seen this before?
Andy, yes, I have worked through the document already.
Okay.
Yes.
And Jane, have you?
Yes, I did.
Good. Okay,
Yes,
then we can move relatively quickly. Steps to follow, we've covered. Okay. There's a bit of explanation here about how the evaluation process works. I think we've covered it. What I do want to highlight is under curriculum vitae. Okay. So you'll need to give us a copy of your CV. Please update it, focusing in to make sure it gives us good information about the competencies that you're going to be evaluated against. Focus on the previous 5 years. Okay. So when I say focus in, I'm thinking about often when you put in your CV, you give a 1-word or 2-word description of your responsibilities, like management. It's helpful to the evaluator if you can give us more information about what you are managing. So managing a team of 5 people responsible for A, B, C, and D. That helps the evaluator a great deal in understanding your experience and what you might be competent in. okay? Then the competency, designation competencies you've seen before, then look at the minimum requirements. So what this is saying, you must provide evidence against at least 75% of the designation competencies above, which means that you must provide evidence against at least 4 of the 5 designation competencies. So you don't have to give us an example in every single area. You might, for example, have never worked with a quality management system. That does not disqualify you. You must address at least 4 of the 5, and you must provide us with at least 8 examples. So it's typically 2 examples per competency. And it must be over a period of at least 5 years. Okay, so that's your target. So think about 8 examples of where you're competent. Stephanie, go ahead.
Yes, Andy, I just want to ask something. This is something that bothered me a bit. I worked for a company for 6 years as a skills development facilitator, key account manager with clients, or as an external SDF for companies in different sectors, also varying from 5 employees to almost 1,000 employees. And then I took a bit of sabbatical, and then for the last almost 1 year, I'm back into the industry, again as an external practitioner. Now I have submitted for external clients in the last reporting period. My concern is, even though, for instance, I've worked with the QMS and all of that, I don't have that evidence yet. So and you said I need to report on the last 5 years, but because I've taken a break in between, will I be penalized?
How big was your gap? Stephanie, how big was your gap?
It was a big gap, about 6 years.
About 6 years.
Yeah, even though I've been doing like once off for smaller clients, just submitting and so on. But in that, I've worked in the industry for 6 years.
Steph, I think, sorry to interrupt you, I think you should go ahead. The issue is, what the evaluator is looking at is to say, is this person, do they have solid working experience? Okay. Okay. So if somebody's freshly out of studying, but has no working experience, they're not ready yet for a designation. They need to have decent working experience, because, you know, the bulk of what makes you good at your job is stuff that you've learned. It's the nuances that you've learned by doing the work. The qualification might be very good background, but until you're actually doing the work and dealing with the people and dealing with the issues, you don't become good until you actually have done that and you've been through that baptism of fire, if you like.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that you had a gap doesn't disqualify you, because you already have quite a few years of working experience. Then you took a gap. The other question is, are you current? So if you had last done this 6 years ago and you had no fresh working experience, you clearly would not be current. But you're saying that you've actually got a year's current working experience. So presumably you've caught up, and presumably you'll be able to show that in your evidence. So I think you're good to go. I don't think you must let this stop you.
Okay, thank you. And because I can get recommendations from my previous employer as well.
Yes. Yes.
To verify that. And so if I get a lot of recommendations from them and from now as well, while I'm still current, okay, so I will get all of that just to as proof, basically.
Yes, yes, okay. That's the thing.
Okay, thank you so much. And then, yeah, we'll just see how it goes then.
Yeah, but I think that's a good question to ask. And I just want to pick up the other thing that you're referring to, is getting confirmation from your previous clients. Often, you know, that is the experience of most of us, is that we don't necessarily keep hard evidence of stuff that shows our competence. So often you're going to need to go back and get a testimonial from people who you've worked with. And so the guy, and please include them in your evidence. It's not going to disqualify you if you've got testimonials. What I would suggest that you do, if you need to get a testimonial, write it for the person who's going to sign it, because you want to make sure that you include the correct and relevant information in it, so that when it comes to the evaluator can very clearly see what role you played, was it successful, etc., etc. So to get that level of detail, you probably need to draft the testimonial. They, of course, must, if they don't like it, they're not going to sign it. So I don't think you are doing, I don't think you're pushing a boundary by drafting it for them. Make sure that it's clear and comprehensive, and then get a credible person to sign it. Credible, it would probably need to be somebody more senior in management, maybe somebody who commissioned you to do the work. Somebody like that is the best person to get to sign off a testimonial. And that's why you need a bit more time. Hey? Those 2 weeks. Often you'll sit down, you'll maybe take a weekend, and you'll go through, you'll identify examples, you'll write them out carefully, and you'll say, okay, now how do I prove this stuff? And then you'll say, okay, well, I've got some evidence, but now I need to go, I don't have it all, and I need to get testimonials. And that's when you draft the testimonial letters, and you send them off, and you then must wait for people to come back to you. So that can take a bit of time.
Thank you so much for
no, but it's a very good question, and that's also why I said there's this paradigm shift. We're doing an RPL exercise. It's not as simple as making reference back to learning material and say, can you answer a question based on the learning material? This is more complicated than that. Okay, so whatever evidence you submit must meet VARC requirements. And I'm very briefly going to go through them, and I'll leave you guys to read them. Jane, if you've got questions later on and you want to raise them.
I just want to check something.
Yes.
Do I also need a testimonials or a recommendation letter will do?
Look, if I'm evaluating a portfolio and somebody's written to confirm something that you've done, I will look at it and I'll say, well, does it provide me with a clear description, and is it signed by somebody that I think is credible? So those are the things I'm looking for as an evaluator. I don't know if that answers your question though.
Yeah, no, it's fine. It answers. Thank you so much. Okay.
Just have a look at these VARC requirements. Firstly, it says that whatever evidence you submit must be valid. In other words, it's appropriate. It links to the competency. And it helps the evaluator make reliable evaluation decisions. It must be authentic. In other words, it must refer to stuff that the candidate has actually done. It must be reliable. In other words, it needs to show that there's some consistency. It must be current. In other words, it must talk about, and here we've got typically the previous 3 years, but Stephanie, given your working experience, that's not a strict rule, and it must be sufficient. So it must show there's enough evidence that you're competent. Okay, and then the level of detail, you've seen this already, we've spoken through it. And then here you see the guidelines in red. So just have a look at these. I'll just pick up on some of these. The qualification. If you give us a qualification copy, please, it must be a certified copy and within the past 6 months. The CV we've spoken about already. Please give us contact details of the most recent employer so that if the evaluator wants to do a reference check, they can do that. Then the experiential learning. You'll see there successful implementation of similar planning and development strategies and confirmation of that. And so that can be either a mandatory grant submission to the CETA or a submission of a performance and skills development plan to an organization. A statement that this has been accepted by the business and that it focuses on business objectives will be accepted as sufficient evidence, and the CETA confirmation you've seen there. And then a recommendation. So here, if you look at that recommendation, look at the wording there. It must confirm in the opinion of this person that the candidate is competent against at least 4 of the 5 designation competencies. That's why I'm suggesting to you that you should draft it yourself to make sure that it gives that information, because whoever, if they draft it themselves, they might not be specific enough. Okay. And then this is an outline of the workbook that you're going to work through with the rubrics included in them. So you'll see that it says candidate explanation under number 1. That's where you will type in your responses. Then the evaluator feedback, the bit in red, that's completed by the evaluator. And so for each of them, that's how it will look. And then they will put the points on the right-hand side in that block there. Moving down to point number 4, this is where you provide the list of evidence that's relevant just to this example. And then lastly, the evaluator will give an overall feedback and a decision. So it's whether it's accepted or not accepted. Okay, there is an appeal process. So if you disagree with the evaluation decision made, you have the right to appeal that process. The right to appeal comes only after verification, because if the evaluator hasn't done a decent job, let's get the verifier to check that out and sort that out first. If at that point in time you don't like the evaluation decision, then you have the right to appeal. Now, what happens if you make an appeal? We will appoint a new evaluator and we'll go through the process again from start to finish. And then they must agree or disagree with the original evaluation decision, and it goes to verification. Now, if the new evaluator upholds the previous evaluator's decisions, then you must pay for the new evaluation. If, however, they overturn it, then the ASDSA will cover those costs. Okay, any questions? Okay.
No, everything is clear, thank you.
Okay.
Clear.
Then compiling your portfolio. The thing I want to ask you to do is the beginning of your workbook, you'll see there's a place to list all of the evidence. What I suggest you do, as you start thinking about the examples that you want to use, list the evidence at the beginning of your workbook and number it from 1 through to 36 or 52, however many bits of evidence you've got. So give each piece of evidence a unique name and a unique number, because that'll make it much easier for you to pick out the evidence that you want to use for a particular example, and for the evaluator to do the same. And then please save each piece of evidence separately on an electronic basis, because you're only going to submit stuff electronically. We don't take any hard copy stuff. Electronic stuff is typically, examples are typically sent us as a PDF, not as a Word document, because then that can't be amended and altered. We could, of course, also accept videos or audio files, but that can happen, but it doesn't happen very often. That's not evidence that we often see. Typically, it's going to be a PDF. Okay, then what else is you'll find in this, this guideline document? You'll see there are 3 appendices. So just to go through to them, first one is the description that you've seen. The second one is, we did an exercise a little while ago where we said, okay, how do the OFO codes link in with our designations? And we tried to say, well, are there some obvious OFO codes that link to a designation, and are there some that might link to it? And we then coded them in green. So if there's a very clear link between a designation and an OFO code, we did it in green. And if it was a less obvious, we did it in yellow. So if you look here, you'll see under the master's designation, if you have any of these job titles, it may be that you should be looking at a master designation. If you have, and in fact, there were none in the master's category that had greens. The practitioners, these are very typical. If you have any of these OFO codes in green, you probably should be looking at a practitioner designation. And so on for each of the designations. And then lastly, as you're thinking about, here we go, there's a full one. As you're thinking about the competencies that you're trying to find examples, we've given you a list just to get you going. If you're trying to think about instances where you might have a good example. So for example, if you're looking at the first competency, which is develop and maintain organizational skills development and training strategy. And number 2, have you completed the skills development planning and reporting process for an organization? That might be an example. Have you performed a leading role in the committees dealing with skills development, employment equity, and or HR? So these are intended just to help you think about where you might have an example that's relevant. And you'll see we've done the same for each of the 5 competencies. So there's B and so on all the way through. And then lastly, we've given you an example of a completed portfolio. So this is the sort of thing that you might be writing. Question
before you continue, no? Yes. I just want to check for an example, let's say number 2, complete the skills development planning and reporting process for the organization. So there, we are given the processes on how this is done. Am I correct?
Just, I don't understand you as yet. Just say that again.
Okay, complete the skills development planning and reporting processes for an organization. Here, are we expected to give you the process on how that is done, or
okay. Actually, this example might actually help. So,
okay.
This is the designation competency has facilitate implementation of skills development and training strategy. Okay, and then the activity description that links closely to it said, did this person compile the prescribed skills development plans and reports and submit them to the relevant authority, e.g. the mandatory grant application? So this candidate says, actually, yes, I did do this. So where's my example? And then they said under candidate explanation, in my role as the company SDF, I must compile and complete the mandatory grant report for my company to the CTB registered with. I have successfully completed this work for the past 2 reporting years. So the candidate said, okay, actually, yeah, it is work that I do. Let me give you an example of that. So this is the example. So they said, the candidate said, I've submitted 2 mandatory grant reports in the last 2 reporting years. Then the candidate said, how does my action show my competence? I'm entirely responsible for submitting the mandatory grant reports for our company. I extract information from my company records that include internal training registers and invoices reflecting payments to external providers. I also gather information from our senior management on priorities, as well as our internal performance management system. I capture these details on the templates provided by the CETA and upload it. I then draw a report and present it to the training committee for review, amendment, and sign-off. I then finalize the report on the CETA and submit it. So you can see the candidates are just describing what role they play and how it links into facilitating this designation competency.
Okay,
so the third one, why is it a good example? In both cases, the training committee has been satisfied with the report and it has been accepted by the CETA. Training committee includes senior management and reps, so that shows the contents of the report are appropriate for the company. And the confirmation from the CETA shows the reports meet the requirements. Now, did the candidate provide evidence? Okay, so what they've done is they've provided an evidence, the CETA approval letter for 2019 and for 2020, and the minutes of the skills committee meeting for 2020 and 2019. And if you look further down, you'll see that here are those examples. Now, they've redacted them, and you need to do that if there is sensitive information, particularly given the POPI Act. So you'll see this was a submission to MIC-CETA, and this is the letter received back from Sakana Mahobo of MIC-CETA for 2019. And then there's a similar letter for 2020. And then the candidate is also given minutes of they call it a skills committee meeting in this company. You'll see that they've redacted the other invitees, but you can see that, in fact, this is one of my submissions, so bear with me. And you'll see that the training skills committee report is also there, but has been redacted. Explains the role, explains the role of the candidate, and so on and so forth. So that's the 2020 report, and there's also the 2019 report. So you'll see also what the candidate has done here is, now just bear with me while I flick up quickly. The candidate is only given 4 pieces of evidence. You don't have to put endless amounts of evidence. You must just put sufficient evidence that's relevant to this particular competency. So, you know, we're not asking you to provide an encyclopedia of information. We're asking you to provide just sufficient evidence to demonstrate your competence. Makes sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah,
Yes.
definitely.
All right, so let's go to the workbook and quickly go through that. Okay, so the workbook is up, you can see it. Okay, so your name goes at the top, place for the evaluator to complete their details and so on and so forth. There's a contents list, the competence you've seen. Here's the list of documents. You see we've already given a number to it. So here you must put in a unique name for each of them. And obviously when you save the document, it must have the same number and the same description as you have on this evidence list. And you get this as a Word document, so you can keep adding lines to it, rows to it, to have as many bits of evidence as you might need. So you list all of the evidence that you've got there. Then you start going to the documents you submit. So here you'll see it says qualifications, the document names of the evidence submitted, and the evaluator can then comment. Your CV, what is the number and name of the document that's got your CV? Then the submission of the approved workplace skills plans or similar document names, and then the recommendation. And then you've seen this before. And here's competency A, develop and maintain organization skills development strategy, example 1. Okay, and you're filling in the rows that are in white, and the rest is done by the evaluator. And you've seen this document before. Okay, so that's competency A, example 1. On the next page, there's a place for another, there's example 2, also for competency A. So you see for each competency, we've made place for up to 2 examples. And then the next one is competency B, and this is now example 3. And so on, all the way through. Any questions about that? Is it all making sense?
Everything's making sense. Thank you, Andy.
Okay. Jane, you good there?
Yes, I am good. But my question was that as I was checking the workbook and also the guidelines, yes. For an example, let me go back to the guideline just a second. Activities mapped against designation competencies. For A, which is develop and maintain organizational skills development and training strategies, it has got 9 points. Ne? So I wanted to know, should we address all of this in the workbook?
No, those are just to give you some ideas. What you need to do is to say to yourself, okay, if I think about this particular competency, I must get 2 examples from my working history, any 2 examples that are relevant. And that's what I must give, just 2 examples.
Oh, thank you so much. Because I was working through each and every one. Maybe that's why I took time.
Oh, a mountain of work. No, you don't need to do that.
Oh, okay.
No, we just need 2 examples per competency. And look, so that gives you some freedom. If you think back over the things that you've done, you might have been doing it for a long time. So just pick the 2 that it's very clear what your role is and where you've got the best evidence. Just give us those examples.
Okay, thank you so much.
So it can be 2 different for instance, on the external
Absolutely.
issues, so it can be
Absolutely.
2 different companies or clients I'm working with.
Absolutely. You know,
Okay.
remember what you're also trying to do is you're trying to show that you are that you have consistency. You're consistently good at stuff. So 2 different companies gives actually a better indication of consistent good performance. So I'd encourage it if you can.
Okay, thank you.
So let me just page on. Then before you close off, you need to sign this declaration. And let's just go through it. I hereby declare that all the evidence that I submitted is of work that I have completed personally or have been directly responsible for. I have not submitted any evidence that I was not responsible for and it was completed by someone else. Now that includes then, if you are the SDF for a larger organization and you have administrators who help you data capture and gather evidence and such like, you nevertheless are responsible for them. You're not saying that you did all the work yourself. You're saying that you were responsible for it. So there's no disconnect there for you. Then understand that if it's found I submitted work that I've not done, I am subject to a disciplinary inquiry, and that can have serious consequences. Okay. Then the last page, next page, it can happen that as the evaluator is working through this, they realize that the candidate actually does not yet have enough experience. And here's a place then for the evaluator to have a conversation with the candidate. Say, look, you really need to get more involved in A, B, C, or D, whatever the case may be. Where do you think you can find opportunities to get involved in those things? Because that's what's missing from your background. You don't have enough experience. And then they can put together a development plan where the candidate can say, listen, I need to do A, B, and C. Who could I be chatting? If I'm going to try and do that work, what are the contacts? Who do I need to speak to? And how long will it take me? So that'll help the candidate plan when they can, again, submit a portfolio when they have got sufficient evidence. So that's the anticipated completion date. So from time to time, it does happen that a candidate just doesn't have enough of the right working experience. Maybe it's been too narrow, or maybe they are too new. And we spend some time with them and just try and help them work out how can they get the outstanding experience, and when can they come back again for another evaluation. And the last page is not for you to complete, but just that you know this is what the evaluator does. They'll look at the examples, they'll make a note, and there's a tracking sheet, and then a place for them to sign off and the verifier to sign off. So that's the workbook. Questions?
No, I don't have any questions. I think you went through everything, and everything is clear. The question I had, and that's why I emailed, was because everything had to, every competence had 2 examples. So I just wanted to make sure about that. But yeah, everything's fine on my side.
Jane?
Thank you so much for this. It really clarified most of the things. I could have been finished by now, but then because I didn't know,
Okay.
But yeah, my question now is when you have to do the next level, so it means you have to have a level 7 next before you do the master's one. Okay, yes. You do level 7, and thereafter you can do the master's one.
The key thing for a master's is 2 things. One is the qualification.
Okay.
But, you could RPL qualification, but the more important thing is you need to have been working in a strategic role. So if you've been working in a strategic role for at least 5 years, then that might be the appropriate designation for you. But that remember the issue about a designation, it's about working experience. It's are you operating at that level? And have you been operating at that level in an effective way for long enough? That's what gets you the designation.
Okay, now I understand.
Mhm.
I get it. Thank you so much, Andy.
And if that's where you're going, please get there quickly. We want more
Yes, I want
masters
to very
designees.
quickly. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Any final questions from anyone?
No, I'm just eager to finish everything and
Great,
yeah, get everything submitted.
great. I would encourage you to do that. In fact, is to focus on it and get it done and in, because the longer you leave it, somehow it gets more difficult. If I can
Yeah.
encourage you to get it sorted out and get it in as soon as possible, do it in one go if you possibly can. That will help
Okay,
you a
we'll
lot.
do that.
Yeah.
We'll do that.
Great. We look
Thank you
forward to
so
seeing
much.
your portfolios there. All right.
Okay. All right.
Thanks,
Andy.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Stephanie. All the
Thank you
best.
so much, Andy.
Pleasure
Thank you
then.
too, Jane.
Okay.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye,
bye.
everyone.